Hello and welcome to my channel. So, in honor of Black History Month, I would like to do some videos focused on a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and also is the base story for my new model my new book that's coming out titled Forbidden. So, Forbidden is about American Aborigines that are in America that are hidden or and being protected by um, other tribes. So, as I talk about an article that I read online, I got this article from NBCnews.com, and I'll leave a link in the description. But as I talk about it, I'm actually going to be working on my book, Forbidden, and I'm coming close to the end of this book. So, as I'm writing that, I'm also going to talk about what I discovered in this article. I'm going to read the article, and the title is The Black Native American Descendants Fighting for the Right to Belong. Descendants of enslaved members of the Muscogee Creek Nation have been in a decades-long fight for recognition after they were told they could no longer call themselves members. So that had got my attention, and because it's something, I write about it, it's something that I research. And growing up, with my background, my great grandmother was Carib Indian. My grandmother is Native. She's Native American and Black American. But when you start to understand, you realize that she's just full-blooded Native American. It's a long story. Anyway, I'm interested in topics that pertain to this because I feel like we were robbed, as Black people, we were robbed so much, and we don't know our history, we don't know who we are. And I think a reason why is because a lot of the things that we're told of who we are doesn't always resonate with us. And when you start to do your own research and you start to figure things out, you start to realize why the stories you were told about who you were and where you came from didn't resonate with you. I grew up in a different family. I guess I'd be like Trinidadian American. So my history is slightly different, but at the end of the day, we're all coming from the same people, if that makes sense. Anyway, so I'm going to go on to read this article because it was very interesting. So it was written by a lady named Claire, and God forgive me if I say her name wrong. It's Claire Tighe, Tighe, and this was written November 20th, 2020, or posted November 20th, 2020. And it's very, very, very interesting. So I'm going to go ahead and get into this. When Rhonda Grayson was growing up in Oklahoma, summer visits with her grandparents' house in Wewoka, it's Wewoka, so Wewoka, I could be saying it wrong, meant time spent in the kitchen with her grandmother. Together they cooked peach cobbler and traditional native foods like wild onions, poke salad, and hominy, the corn used to make grits. Cooking was just one way Grayson learned about the rich history and culture of the generations of Black Native Americans who came before her. I was always keenly aware of my African ancestry, said Grayson, 51. Part of her lineage was Native American. I'm sorry. Part of her lineage was Native too. I also knew that we were Creek. One of those Black Creek ancestors was Grayson's great-grandmother, America Cohee. Cohee was an original enrollee in the Muscogee Creek Nation. For generations, Black Creeks like Cohee had been a part of the tribe until one day they weren't. For more than 40 years, Black Creek descendants like Rhonda Grayson have been fighting to regain citizenship in the Creek tribe because their lineage also harks back to the dark days of chattel slavery. Chattel slavery. These would be members of the Creek Nation have been shut out in a year marked by historic uprisings in support of Black lives. These Black Native Americans say now is the time to acknowledge their rights too, and I completely agree with that. The deep impact of the Dawes Act, based in Okmulgee, Oklahoma, the Creek Nation today has more than 86,000 enrolled citizens. It is one of the largest federally recognized tribes in the United States. The nation's land includes more than 7,000 square miles across Oklahoma, stretching from Tulsa in the north to the Canadian River at its southern edge. The Creek people descend from indigenous tribes who lived in southeastern U.S. long before European colonization, but eventually those two histories converged. As chattel slavery became a core economic engine in the colonies, some tribes, including the Creek, also capitalized on slave labor. The late 1700s was when the tribe really began to pick up on Black enslavement, as Elena E. Roberts, an assistant professor of history at the University of Pittsburgh, the Creek Nation adopted chattel slavery as a strategic effort. Roberts said to ally with white settlers by assimilating to their culture. But assimilating wouldn't stop the forces of colonization. In the 1830s, the federal government forced the Creek people from their land in Alabama and Georgia to the newly created Indian Territory in what is now Oklahoma. Among those relocated were free Blacks living as members of the tribe and those with mixed African and indigenous heritage. Others were enslaved. People often think about the Trail of Tears, Grayson said, but they never think about the folks of African descent. They suffered loss just like full-blood Indians suffered loss. About 24,000 Creek people were removed on the Trail of Tears, and by 1860 the Creek Nation held 1,600 people in bondage. Historians estimate that by 1861, 8,000 to 10,000 Blacks were enslaved by various tribes of Indian Territory. Slavery ended in the greater U.S. in 1865, but not in the Creek Nation until 1866. This year, the U.S. government signed a treaty freeing the tribe's enslaved people, now freedmen, and giving them the right to tribal citizenship. Despite the treaty, the question of freedmen citizenship would be debated for a century and a half. In 1898, the U.S. government divided Creek land and gave allotment to each tribal member, aiding the process where the Dawes rolls, which were created by the federal government to categorize Creek people by their blood quantum, or as freedmen, people who been enslaved or were descendants from formerly enslaved. But the Dawes system was flawed, and it created a false binary between freedmen and blood citizens. Members were placed on the rolls based on how they looked, whom they associated with, and where they lived. These were white men from the outside who don't understand how tribal members work, Roberts said. So a lot of it was what they think an Indian or Black person looks like and acts like. No matter their actual ancestry, light-skinned people could end up on the blood roll, while darker-skinned people were listed on the freedmen roll. There are plenty of examples in all the tribes in which people in the same family are put on two different rolls, Roberts said. For a long time, the rolls were a matter of historical documentation. The people designated as Creek freedmen were full citizens of the Creek Nation until 1979 when everything changed. That year, the tribe voted for a new constitution, changing the requirements for tribal citizenship. It required blood ancestry to belong to the tribe, using the final by blood Dawes roll as proof. From that point on, anyone who previously had membership as a result of freedman ancestry was unenrolled. This was a significant hit to the previously black members. In the 1960s and 70s, the Creek Nation began to receive millions of dollars in federal payments for historical violations of treaties dating to the 1800s, and it was beginning to restructure its government. Around this time, Roberts said, many tribes like the Creek were seeking new ways to reinforce their sovereignty from the U.S. government and their nation's social identities. Changing the terms of citizenship was one way to tell a new story about themselves. From that point on, to be a member of the Creek Nation meant to be by blood citizen. Creeks and the fight for self-determination. Sharon Lindsay Scott's mother, Adeline Perryman Lindsay, was one of the members who was disenrolled around the time the federal payments were approved. They just said that you were no longer a citizen of the nation. Lindsay Scott said one day she was a Creek citizen and the next she wasn't. She was ineligible for future federal payments. Perryman Lindsay fought to be re-enrolled for more than 20 years, but that didn't happen by the time she died in 2000. Since the 1970s, descendants of Creek freedmen like Perryman Lindsay have tried to re-enroll and been denied. For the Creek freedmen descendants today, disenrollment has meant the loss of cultural identity, including recognition of the Creek Nation's practice of slavery. It has also fractured the descendants' sense of belonging, a source of pain that Rhonda Grayson said is still felt today. If we say that we are Black Creeks, we will get flacked from not only people who don't look like us, but from people who look like us, Grayson said. And they will tell us that we are trying to be Indians and we are not Indians. We are just Black people, or other terms that they would use. Disenrollment has also amounted to incalculable material losses across generations, including the right to vote and run in tribal elections, access to federal funded programs for housing and health care, also as financial assistance for college, or Grayson said COVID-19 financial support. With a $312 million allocation from the CARES Act, the Creek Nation distributed payments of up to $1,500 to citizens of distributed payments of up to $1,500 to citizens as economic relief. How many people of African descent have been affected by COVID-19 and could use that payment, Grayson said. Grayson estimates that there are a few thousand Creek freedmen descendants like her who would be eligible for tribal citizenship. In 2018, Grayson and Lindsay Scott's organization, the Muskogee Creek Indian Freedmen Band, filed a federal lawsuit against the Creek Nation and the Interior Department. But in May 2019, the case was dismissed. Grayson applied for citizenship again in 2019 and was denied. She has filed a new lawsuit in the Creek Nation's lower court, and that case is in discovery. Meanwhile, outside, the legal pressure has been building. In July, the Supreme Court reached a decision in McGritt versus Oklahoma that has built upon the agreement laid out in the 1866 Creek Treaty. In 2017, the Cherokee freedmen won a Supreme Court case that confirmed their right to enroll as citizenships of the Cherokee tribe based on the 1866 Cherokee Treaty. By those victories, but those victories haven't been a harbinger for the Creek freedmen yet. The Creek Nation said in a statement that the grave injustice done to the slaves owned by some Creeks has to be acknowledged and discussed, but that blood lineage is essential to protecting the tribe's identity. It added that blood lineage has implications that cut to the core of self-determination. Grayson doesn't buy the tribe's official argument of self-determination or sovereignty, which gives the tribe the right to decide the criteria for enrollment. Greed and racism. That's exactly what it's all about, she said. According to Roberts, the University of Pittsburgh professor, the tribe's self-determination is held up by the 1866 treaty. And the treaty also gives the Creek freedmen a right to belong to the tribe. If anything, the Creek Nation's treatment of freedmen could be plainly compared to the ways the U.S. government historically disregarded the tribe's struggle for recognition and self-determination. You can't pick and choose, Roberts said. If you want treaties to be recognized and acknowledged, you need to recognize and acknowledge them as well. For Grayson and Lindsay Scott, that recognition has been 41 years in the making. So that's the end of it. There's just a lot to be said. It's unfortunate that this is going on, but this is the world. This is the world we live in. But the good thing is that it is time that we start knowing who we are. It is time that we start. Um, it's time that we start fighting back. That we need to really address this, because this is an important issue, and it actually goes pretty deep. So this article was really good. These are the things that I will be sharing. The book that I'm writing is called Forbidden, and it's about a tribe that lives in a cave system in today's time, and they're Aborigines of America, and they can trace, I wanted to basically trace the whole path of humanity. I personally believe we all came from Africa. We all came from Africa. It's like the root. And when I say all, I mean everybody. White, black, purple, green. I think all of us came from Africa. But we migrated. We didn't stay in Africa. And just because you're dark skinned or you're considered black doesn't mean that you came from Africa. And a lot of times, when you have people who say, "Oh, well, someone's black, so they're African American," and most African Americans cannot trace what tribe they came from in Africa, and that's because they're not from Africa. It's been so long, you can't claim Africa anymore. And that's I can go through my family history, and I know, I think it's my great grandfather was Congo. He was Congo, and he migrated to Trinidad. That's the story that I was told. But there's a tribal name, but a lot of people, African American, they don't know what tribe. They might have heard a rumor, maybe a rumor like me. For all I know, that might not be true. My grandfather may not be Congo. He might not have been Congo, but chances are he was. That's what he told. That was the history he told his children and grandchildren. So that's what was passed down. So I'm pretty sure he knows where he came from. But my point is, a lot of us don't know and don't have no clue. And I don't believe in using this DNA testing kits. I just don't agree with it. But a lot of us cannot pinpoint what tribe we come from in Africa. And I think there's a reason for that. And my reason is because we're not from Africa, not all of us. When you study the whole history of slavery, there were, I think it was less than 40,000 African slaves that made it to the U.S. So you're trying to, and a lot of them died. A lot of them didn't come to the U.S. A lot of them, it's a very small number that actually made it to the U.S. They were already natives here. That's the thing. And I remember stories from Native American storytellers. Uh, just going a little personal, but my ex-husband, who's full-blooded Native, he's a storyteller. And one story he always used to tell me was that when they came down, the story is that when they moved to North America, they were not the first ones here. There were already people here, and they looked like the so-called African American. So that's something to really think about. This is oral history that was passed down thousands of years, and Native Americans are saying that we were not the first ones here. Not all say this, but a lot do. Something to think about. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this interesting topic that I brought about. These are just the things that I like to talk about. These are things that I enjoy, and it pertains to what I'm writing and working on right now. So if you have any questions, I'm going to leave the the links to the article that I read in the description, and I'm also going to, you can also go to my website and you can check out more of my content there. I hope you have a wonderful and blessed day, and happy Black History Month.